Welcome everyone to a conversation about inner and outer peace with three outstanding panelists who have a lot of experience and knowledge about peace. My name is Audrey Kitagawa. I'm the president and founder of the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation. It is my great privilege today to have these three distinguished members of the Academy's International Advisory Council join us for this important discussion. My deepest appreciation to Jonathan Granoff, Dr. Azza Karam, Sadhviji Bhagawati Saraswati for participating in this discussion today. We will explore possible answers to how do we achieve peace on Earth, especially in the face of all the challenges we have today. Is peace the responsibility of our governments and world leaders, or is it our own personal responsibility? Is world peace possible if we don't have peace within ourselves? And is finding inner peace possible without working toward peace in the world? In this discussion, we will distinguish between inner and outer peace, and I suggest to you that perhaps outer peace is a reflection of the inner peace, which must exist first. The many external disturbances that we face are really reflections of our own inner state of being projected outwards by individuals, families, communities, and even entire nations. In order to foster change, the hearts of mankind must be moved to do their own inner works. And perhaps, given the current state of the world, this is exactly the right time when people are starkly faced with the world's greatest existential challenges to commence their inward journey simultaneously to find peace. In a speech in 2015, Zbigniew Brzezinski, former national security advisor during the Carter administration, expressed his concern that world peace would not likely be the result of the actions of the dominant international powers because of increasing contentiousness. However, he felt that genuine world peace, meaning effective consensus regarding shared sacrifices, as well as voluntary cooperation, is theoretically possible, but is most likely some decades away with threats to humanity's existence generated by global warming, pollution, and so forth, and has become imminent threats to us all. Now, just 6 years later, not decades later, his words ring true as threats to human existence from the rampant exploitation of our environment are more and more evident in daily life. Hurricanes, floods, wildfires, rising sea levels, extreme heat and cold are regularly featured in the news. And activists, humanitarians, concerned government officials, and citizens are beginning to focus on the possibility that in addition to the threat of nuclear war, the damage that has been inflicted on the planet is an imminent danger requiring the cooperative focus of all nations. While a nuclear disaster may be difficult for the average person to envision, we all can directly see, feel, and experience the effects of climate change and global warming in our everyday lives. Disturbances such as war, social unrest, domestic abuse, destruction, and mismanagement of our environment, and other forms of violence are indications of how much harder we all must work to cultivate our own inner peace, because creating a peaceful external world is all of our responsibility. As global citizens, we all have individual and collective responsibility to work on ourselves first, but also the many challenges before us. This will require a simultaneity of action. When we become peaceful individuals and collectively as a society, we will reflect a peaceful world on the outside. To the extent that what we see going on in the world is not peaceful and harmonious, let that be an impetus to work on ourselves and our own inner state of peace, while we also seek solutions to the external problems which have been caused by us. We each must be part of the solution. While we might want to blame society, governments, institutions, or the corporate world and their practices for the problems we face, we must remember that all governments, corporations, and other institutions are ultimately run by and led by the people in positions of leadership. Therefore, we must be mindful of who we are placing in positions of authority And this is very important because a leader uses language, and creates policies that are reflective of his or her own inner world. And if that leader speaks the language of hatred, racism, judgment, and discord, it can create polarization, incite violence, and create divisive thoughts and actions, which manifest as hate crimes, human rights violations, atrocities, and ultimately genocide. Our spiritual communities and faith leaders have a responsibility to share messages of peace and educate the members of their communities about proper practices that will help them to live lives that are in alignment with the goals of love, peace, and happiness. And the practices of meditation, prayer, and creating and being in loving families and communities connect us with ourselves and others. Places of worship have always been a beacon for those seeking solace and peace, and they have a responsibility to create opportunities to raise the collective consciousness of mankind and continuously to help us remember that our connection to the divine source is primary. It is my joy now to share this conversation with three individuals from such diverse backgrounds and spiritual traditions, whose perspectives on the topic of inner and outer peace are sure to bring forth thoughts, ideas, and inspiration that will help all of us on our journey together toward inner and outer peace. It is my privilege to introduce Jonathan Granoff. Jonathan Granoff is the president of the Global Security Institute. He is an attorney, author, and international advocate, emphasizing the legal and ethical dimensions of human development and security, focusing on advancing the rule of law to address global security and the threats posed by nuclear weapons. Jonathan has represented the International Peace Bureau at the Nobel Peace Laureate Summits in Rome every year since 2002. He is a recipient of the Rutgers University School of Law's Arthur E. Armitage Distinguished Alumni Award and a 2014 nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize. Jonathan has been blessed with the privilege of studying for many years with Baba Muhaiyaddin, an enlightened Sufi master. Jonathan, you now have the floor.
God bless you. Thank you. You said so much that needs to be said, grounding the presentation in the very first and foremost place where we are responsible for peace, and that is within our own birth. I often wonder how people who are not in a state of peace internally can expect to bring peace into the world externally. And we've just seen in the political leadership of the major countries of the world numerous instances of ego-driven, insecure men, almost all men, causing tremendous suffering for so many people. But the first place that we are responsible for peace, and there's never any excuse for not pursuing it, is within our own consciousness, within our own self, within our own hearts. The journey from the head to the heart, from imaging oneself and imaging the divine to the heart where the experience of the divine can take place, is the most important journey we can take. If we do everything else but don't discover the presence of the divine within our human birth, we will have forsaken the most precious and valuable of opportunities. So I'm going to say a few principles for the pursuit of inner peace, and then some principles for the pursuit of peace amongst the institutions of the world that are so powerfully governing our relationships externally with one another and the natural world. Peace is an inside job. And the first principle, I think, in terms of our actions that enhance peace inside in how we act in the world, is that we have to love people and learn to use things, and never to love things and use people. People are precious, and in the process of learning to love one another, the transformation of developing a heart that is capable of experiencing the love of God, the love that comes from the mystery that brought us into the world, the consciousness that's capable of knowing the forgiveness that is our birthright, the patience that is our birthright, the contentment that is our birthright, comes about. But when we love things like our ideas, our dogmas, our property, our identity of race, religion, caste, creed, nation, and put that before our love of life and people, we forsake that birthright. Because the power of love is the transformative power. It's not performative, it's transformative. And when a person is transformed, they perform differently. So another principle is separate from oneself that which separates one from others. Because exactly the same qualities that separate us from one another, anger, falsehood, jealousy, pride, vanity, separate us from one another. And the qualities that bring us together as people, love, compassion, patience, tolerance, justice, bring us together with ourself, with the source of ourself, and with one another. Those principles are enough to get guidance that can eliminate the greatest insecurity, which is the insecurity of our mortality. And we've just experienced an amazing human awakening on the planet because of the pandemic that has demonstrated to so many people how frail and precious breathing is. How frail and precious breathing is. Now, breathing is a very mystical phenomenon. It ties us together with the trees that are like upside down lungs that provide almost half of our oxygen, and the single cell organisms in the ocean, the phytoplankton that produces over 50% of our oxygen. And that those living things are breathing us, and they're part of us. They're part of our body. And we are operating in the way in which we produce goods and services, drive our cars, heat our homes in such a way that we are injuring our lungs. We're injuring our ability to breathe and survive and live. Because we're doing it based on a myth, the myth of perpetual growth and the myth that the natural world should be manipulated to serve our ideas and our needs, rather than the duty that we have to live in harmony with the natural world. We have an economic system based on perpetual growth. The natural world doesn't operate that way. If the human beings, if we all disappeared, the ants would do just fine. But if the ants disappeared, we'd only live for a few months. We need a little perspective and realism. And the other major institutions that are governing the outer world are also operating based on a myth. Our nations, last year our nation spent almost $2 trillion in weaponry designed to pursue peace by threatening ultimate annihilation, particularly the nuclear arsenals. And we've come to the point where the more we perfect the weapons, the less peace, the less security we obtain. The more the weapons are perfected, the less security is obtained. The world now is practically compelled to realize the unity of the human family, which has been a spiritual admonition of the wise since time immemorial, to see all lives as precious as one's own, regardless of race, caste, religion, ideology. But now this has become a necessity. And it's interesting. The business world operates that way. Global finance operates that way. Science operates without borders. Fashion operates without borders. Culinary arts are operating without borders. And there are many people, like many people watching this, and certainly the sisters that I'm on with, have hearts without borders. But we don't have a security system, a way of pursuing peace based on a borderless world. So we have the major countries of the world pursuing a myth that comes from Roman times, which is pursue war and receive peace. That by more military power, peace will be obtained. And that is a myth. The truth matters. And the truth is, we are one human family. And the truth is, our physical bodies depend on how we collectively treat the natural world and one another. The truth is that as we pursue becoming fully human, becoming compassionate, patient, tolerant, humble, as we become that way, we receive the benefits. After World War I, the powers that prevailed imposed crushing punishment on the people of Germany. And the world received the chaos and whirlwind of Nazism. After World War II, there was a little bit of wisdom from those who looked over the edge and saw the power of destruction. Not only did they create the United Nations system, but the most powerful country instituted the Marshall Plan, the consequence of which was Germany and Japan became robust democracies and trading partners. Virtue in action works. Fear and the pursuit of power do not work in our individual lives, nor do they work in the affairs of nations. My prayer for myself and for all of us is that we realize the fullness of our humanity in this birth and realize the power of God's love. Thank you, Audrey, for bringing us together to share. And I really look forward to my two incredibly beautiful and wise sisters. It is really an honor to be in this panel. I mean, I'm humbled and grateful, deeply grateful to be here.
So now I'd like to introduce Professor Dr. Aza Karam. She is a Secretary General of Religions for Peace, the largest multi-religious leadership platform with 92 national and 6 regional interreligious councils. She holds a professorship of religion and development at the Free University in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. She has served in numerous capacities at the United Nations as well as other intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations, including the United Nations Population Fund and the United Nations Interagency Task Force on Religion and Development. Dr. Professor Aza Karam, you now have the floor.
Thank you very, very much. Ms. Audrey Kitagawa, Divine Mother, it's always a tremendous privilege to be in your presence and to be able to listen and learn from you. I do have to be very honest about the fact that if I was asked to nominate at least 3 contemporary prophets in our day and age, I would have nominated every single one on this call, because you are in every extent my prophets, and I very much can appreciate. And I'm very humbled by the learning that each and every encounter with each one of you always generates. So much blessings and gratitude for welcoming me amongst such a community of prophets and wisdom. And I'm very grateful for it. I don't really think there's anything left to be said after you, Audrey, and after Jonathan have spoken. I was scratching my head a few seconds ago thinking, oh, okay, so what now? And I would share perhaps just a few humble reflections with you all. The first reflection is even on the title itself. As I was thinking about it, it occurs to me that as we think of and try to unpack inner and outer peace, it occurs to me that perhaps we are ourselves falling into that same binarism of enlightenment thought that is part of the problem that I think we're all facing today, the us and them person, other, me, other, inner, outer. And of course, I think you've both, Audrey and Jonathan, you've put it so beautifully that one cannot function without the other, and that in a sense, each is a reflection. What happens in the outer world is indeed a reflection of the very base of our instincts, which is fear. But it's a fear that we perhaps, even ourselves hold inside about ourselves. Perhaps we are afraid of ourselves, even before we are afraid of the other. It's just a question that I often wonder about. Are we, as the mantras of fear proliferated so much in the last several years, as they fueled the biological warfare, the nuclear warfare, the nuclear arms race, the annihilation of our nature, is it others we are afraid of, or is it ourselves that we are fundamentally afraid of? And in a way, even though this is such a complicated question, I believe the answer may be far simpler than we would imagine, because I do think we are afraid of ourselves, because we are cognizant of what we are capable of, and because we know that hatred can spread like wildfire so much faster than the effort that sometimes love takes. Love requires effort. It requires commitment. It requires persistence. It needs resilience. It is resilience. And so therefore, love demands effort. And it's an effort that should be a labor of love to indeed realize, create, and sustain. Hatred is very easy. It requires very little indeed, I believe. And I think, therefore, that perhaps what we fear most is what we are most able to change. And that is fear of ourselves. Should we love ourselves a little bit more? Not in the sense of arrogance and self-centeredness that we see in so many corners of the world today, but love ourselves in the sense of have forgiveness and mercy on ourselves, which indeed is a common theme to all the mystics around the world. That it is this ability to tap into the divine mercy that then characterizes who we are. But we can unlock the divine mercy perhaps by being merciful towards ourselves. And what does that entail? And how do we do that? In my very, very limited, humble experience, I have found that I can savor the very tantalizing aromas of divine mercy. So I wouldn't claim to be able to drink from that beautiful, pure, gorgeous water, but I can savor some of its aroma. Really only when I am in the presence of people from many different faith traditions who come together because of this commitment to love, which is a commitment to serve. And it is to serve one another. It is to serve one another and therefore the mirror image of us, but to serve through the persons around us, the nature we inhabit. It isn't a deliberate hard work to rise ourselves, but it is really actually more an intentional, deliberate bowing down to the spirit and the grandeur that is our nature and one another. And when that happens in these moments where people from different faith traditions come together, I believe that is the moment when that flavor, the savoring of the divine mercy, is very much present amongst us. When we then start to serve together with this commitment that is to ourselves, but really through service to everything and everyone around us, but it's still to ourselves, obviously acknowledging that we are part of this beautiful fabric. When we do that we take that additional action. So we come together, and already there is the sun, the beginning of the rays of the sun of divine mercy. We then serve together, whatever it is that we do. That, I believe, is the manifestation of the divine itself. It is in that service to the infrastructure of our lives. It is in that service together that we find that whether it is the Buddha, Allah, multiple creations and manifestations of Vishnu, whatever that deity or these deities are manifest as, we serve one another through them. That is divine mercy. And I believe that that then means, per definition, as we come together to serve together, there is no us and them. There is no inner and outer. We become the object and the subject of what we are doing, what we are actively seeking to deliver and to serve. I wish that COVID, and I'm the type, to be very honest, I'm the type who usually sees the glass half full, okay? And some people tell me, no, it's half empty, and then I will switch positions. But really, I do see the glass half full. And I believe very firmly that COVID, as we heard from you, Divine Mother, as we heard from you, Dr. Granoff, I believe that COVID is a moment of reckoning that nature itself is offering us. And it's a moment of reckoning that we still need to do more. Glass half empty. We still need to do more to acknowledge. I assumed that we would rush to come together, all of us, the institutions and our organizations, to serve together. And there was instead perhaps a confrontation with a particular aspect of reality, which is that the fear too has increased exponentially. That the very institutions which we staff, which we man, which we serve, themselves require a little bit of love from everyone amongst us. And that until we learn that our loyalty should be to one another, beyond the borders, as Jonathan was saying, beyond any and every border, including especially institutional borders. I think until we learn that that's where the loyalty, in order to ensure divine mercy, can come from, we are often haunted and prisoners of our institutions. And that is exactly the same as being haunted and prisoners of our ego. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karam. And now I'd like to share about our beautiful Sadhviji Bhagawati Saraswati. Thank you so much. Sadhviji is a Secretary General of the Global Interfaith Wash Alliance, an international interfaith organization dedicated to clean water, sanitation, and hygiene. She is a president of the Divine Shakti Foundation, a foundation which runs free schools, vocational training programs, and empowerment programs. She is a director of the International Yoga Festival at Parmath, and she is a renowned spiritual leader and motivational speaker based in Rishikesh, India. Originally from Los Angeles, California, and a graduate of Stanford University, she has lived on the banks of the sacred Ganga River for nearly 25 years, engaged in spiritual service, wisdom teaching, sacred action, and deep spiritual practice. She was initiated into the Order of Monastic Renunciation by His Holiness Swami Chidanand Saraswati, a revered spiritual leader in India. So Sadhviji, please, you now have the floor.
What a beautiful, beautiful gift it is to be together. In Sanskrit, there's a word satsang, and it's used colloquially to refer to gatherings when we meditate or we pray or we give spiritual discourses or have questions and answers. But literally the word means in the presence or the association of truth. And this gathering today, this panel today actually feels much more like satsang than like work or like an event. It really feels that we are together in that association of the capital T truth. And so it's very, very precious. And I'm so deeply grateful, Audrey, to you and your beautiful family for convening us, for organizing all of this, to my beloved sister, Dr. Aza Karam, and my beloved brother, Jonathan Granoff. And just what a joy. In Sanskrit, in the scriptures, it said, Yatha drishti, tata shrishti. As is the vision, so is the creation. It's also said, Yatha pinde, tata brahmande. As is the individual, so is the universal. So is the supreme. So is all. As we are inside, so we create, whether through our vision, our thoughts, the place where there is no difference between those. But it's irrefutable that we are co-creating our world. We're co-creating our present reality. We're certainly co-creating our future. But we're even co-creating the present moment and the present reality through our thoughts, through our reactions, our responses to those thoughts. So through our words, through our choices, through our decisions, through the very energetic eminence of our beings in the world, through the narrative, the filter with which we see the world. So are we seeing it, as has been so beautifully shared already? Are we seeing it as us versus them? Are we seeing it as self and other? Or are we seeing it as one? And this is where our individual spiritual work, our meditation, our prayer, our scriptural studies, whatever our individual spiritual path may look like, part of an official religion, not part of an official religion, it doesn't matter. But this is where that practice is so important, because it truly changes who we are and therefore what we are bringing to the world. So for those of us who are deeply engaged in a lot of action in the world, it's critically important for us to remember and re-remember that our spiritual practice, taking the time to meditate, to pray, to read, to study ourself, to connect with God in whatever that may mean for us, is not selfish or self-indulgent, but it's actually the most powerful thing that we can do to help the world. When we are in peace, that is what we exude and share. When we are in love, that is what we exude and share. Think about, a colleague who shows up at work after a beautiful weekend, and everybody knows, she had a great weekend. There's just something, she's glowing. Now, someone who's in love exudes love, not just to the beloved, not even just in the presence of the beloved, but to all. She's gonna, help everybody with their work. She's gonna stay late to help people. She'll bring everybody lunch back. She'll tip the waiter at lunch a lot more. This is just a common way that we understand, she's in love. So when we are in love, we actually become not just happier, not just more shiny and vibrant, but we actually become greater assets to the planet. We walk with love. We speak with love. We choose with love. We move through our daily work with love. And so, as we want to be instruments of peace, instruments of mercy, as St. Francis of Assisi gave us this beautiful prayer. What a high calling to be a tool, an instrument of mercy, of light, of hope, of love. But in order to be that, we have to first have it within ourselves. We can only share that which we have. A can't give you hot air. A heater can't give you cool air. We only can give to the world that which we have. And so our spiritual practice becomes essential. But it's the beginning, not the end. At least the on the mat, on the cushion, eyes closed, legs crossed spiritual practice. It's the beginning. It's what gets us in touch with the truth of who we are, which is one, which isn't this individual body that is separate, that has a color, a race, a religion, a culture, a creed, a sexual orientation, a bank account, but that is actually one with the Creator and one with all of the creation. And so when we have that experience, we stand up from our cushions, from our yoga mats, and we move differently in the world. We walk out of our temples, our churches, our mosques, our synagogues, our gurdwaras. We move out of them as different people in the world. And then everything we choose becomes chosen from that awareness that we are one, and that there really is no place I end and you begin. There's no place I end and the children who are dying of hunger begin. No place I end and the polluted rivers or those depending upon them begin. And this is the last piece I wanted to share, is that as we're speaking about internal peace, it's not in a vacuum. It's an internal sense that is one with all. And with external peace, it's not just an end to guns and bombs and missiles and grenades. It's an end to our sisters and brothers not having access to clean water, to clean soil, to clean air. It is an end to all of that violence. Because for women to be raped in the fields where they have to go in the night in order to defecate because they don't have a toilet, that is violence. For girls to have to drop out of school when they start menstruating is gender-based violence. For children to be dying of diarrhea because their water is polluted is violence. So as we speak about external violence and external peace, we have to realize it doesn't end with guns and missiles and bombs and grenades, but that external peace that we need to bring is a peace across the board, a peace of a clean environment, of a healthy environment, a peace with all of Mother Earth, a peace that is rooted in that oneness and connection with the Creator and with all of creation. And that connection leads us to be able to be creative and courageous in our actions and our words and our thoughts as we bring that inner peace into external peace. Thank you so much for this beautiful opportunity to share and be together with you all.
Sadhviji, thank you so much for your beautiful sharing. You have a background in psychology, and yet you are a religious leader. What can you tell us about the overlap between science and spirituality in the search for inner as well as outer peace?
It's such a beautiful question, and it's a place actually that I really love, because science and spirituality are not at odds with each other. So of course, spiritually, we've always been told, watch the mind, watch your thoughts. Your thoughts are creating your reality. People tend to identify either as a scientist or as a spiritual person. And those who identify as scientists tend in many tragic ways to separate themselves from truths of the spirit, truths from within the framework of our spiritual traditions, which means that they cut themselves off from the truth of who they are. And so I love these days that science is now showing us very much what our sages and saints and rishis and yogis have been saying for thousands and thousands of years, which is, as you think, so you create. As is the inner world, so is the outer world. And so today, for example, we have modern technology. There are brainwave scanning machines that will give you a reading of your brain waves, much like an EEG, but that don't actually touch the skull, that are a few inches outside the skull. And what's so powerful about that is it means that literally that which is taking place in our brain is emanating out through the gray and white matter of the brain, through the bone of the skull, into literally the world outside of us, or the world that we would say is outside when we're not in tune with that truth of there is no inner, there is no outer, it's just all self. So literally a machine today can pick up my brain waves without even touching my brain, which means what you think is going out into the world. How you feel, how you believe is going out into the world. We have a lot of science from institutions as prestigious as Princeton University and other very, very prestigious university-based research institutions in America, in England, in Europe, showing the power of thought, not just upon the physical body of the one who is thinking, which we already know. We know the power of my thoughts on my own digestion, my own immunity. If you doubt that, just sit down to a meal and start thinking of all the things you're angry about, all the people you hate, and you'll see the havoc it wreaks on your digestive system. But we now know that those thoughts, those intentions have the power to impact everything ranging from the rate at which seeds sprout and blossom, to the rate at which plants, flowers, trees grow, to the rate at which immune system cells replicate and divide in a petri dish being held by someone else, to the zeros and ones being given out by a metal random number generating machine. So from the natural world of our own bodies to the natural world of nature outside, trees, plants, to the world of others. What we think is impacting everything. What we think is radiating out. And so this is where our spiritual teaching of watch your thoughts, you will see the future, now is being shown to us by science. The very last piece of this to mention that I love is in quantum physics. First, they told us that we had two things. We had particles and waves, matter and energy. Then they said, well, actually, sometimes particles behave like waves. Sometimes waves behave like particles. Now they've come and they've said, actually, depends who's looking. There's something called the observer effect. Who is looking at the wave or the particle impacts the way that this piece of creation behaves. Do we need any more evidence of the power of our sight, of our thought upon not only our own lives, but every aspect of the world outside of us?
So thank you so much, Saviji, for your beautiful answer. And I'd like to proceed now to Professor Dr. Aza Karam. Dr. Karam, Religions for Peace, for which you are the Secretary General, has called for positive peace and shared well-being. And this is a broad and encompassing goal. Can you share what you envision positive peace to be, and why is it necessary for global well-being?
I believe that according to the International Peace Academy, positive peace is supposed to be, for lack of a better word, the more comprehensive peace that is about not living in poverty, that is about access to affordable, decent health care, that is about access to good quality teaching all the way through to our university level. It is about not just the absence of war, it is about more than the covering of our basic human needs, which today remain largely uncovered for most of the world's population. And basic needs means food, health, water, shelter, that kind of stuff. We're not talking about exotic access to anything. We're talking about basic needs. So positive peace is the whole of the state of dignity, if you will, that should be. Right? And therefore, what Religions for Peace is committed to, when all faith traditions, religious institutions, religious leaders, representatives of faith communities, all faith communities around the world, when they all come together, the commitment is not simply to stop a war, simply. It doesn't stop at stopping a conflict, a war or actual disagreement, conflict. It is far beyond. It is to ensuring the fundamental human dignity of all humans at all times, regardless of any distinctions and barring any and all forms of discrimination. That kind of comprehensive peace is what positive peace is. Okay? And if you then look at the data that we have today, that people like Dr. Jonathan and yourself, Audrey and Sadviji are much better familiar with, we realize that we're talking about a reality in which the majority of the world's population lacks access to basic human need. The majority of the world's population lacks access to basic human needs. So we cannot justifiably speak of a state of peace in this particular context. And if there's any difference that the religions can make, again, we talk about the inner and the outer. If there is to be a difference to what the multi-religious value added is, it has to be to create the tipping point for positive peace, i.e., that state of human dignity that would not exist if human beings lack access to their basic needs or are discriminated against as a result of any particular change they embody or manifest or wish to espouse. And it certainly wouldn't happen in the kind of environmental degradation context that we're all confronting right now. Positive peace is about the whole of that. Multi-religious collaboration, my firm belief is multi-religious collaboration is the tipping point towards the achievement. But why? Why would multi-religious collaboration be the tipping point? Precisely because every religion will obviously have exactly those same principles of wanting to work for all and love all and serve all. So when every single faith tradition comes together to work for all, love all, and serve all, how can we ever leave anyone behind? Who's going to be left behind? If every single faith tradition is working towards that same goal, we cannot leave anybody behind. Per definition, it's impossible. But there's another reason. We know for a fact that the majority of the world's social services, health, education, nutrition, sanitation, you heard Sadhviji speaking about the religious involvement in the simplest of human things to the body, sanitation. The truth is that the majority of the world's social services as we know them today, what we call development today, is actually provided in most cases through many faith-based organizations. Whether it's the schools or the clinics or the healthcare centers, whether it's the actual building of initiatives that look after people, whether it's housing people in times of humanitarian disaster, the basic social services that most of the people today encounter and have access to are actually provided. So many of them are provided through faith-based organizations. Now, academics love to differ about just how much % of basic social services are provided by the world's faith organizations. Oh, is it 30%? Is it 25%? Where did you get that data from? That data's not accurate. Oh, sure, of course. But you know what? Even if it was just 1%, it would be a big difference. So on a practical level, multi-religious collaboration is about bringing together and increasing the scope and the outreach of these basic social service providers. And at the moral and emotional and psychosocial level, it's about serving the needs together such that no one is left behind.
Thank you so much for your response. And I'd like to go to Jonathan Granoff now. So Jonathan, the pursuit of peace is no longer a marginal activity because of the way we have dominated the natural world. And please tell us, what do you feel are the principles and policies that are needed for the survival of humanity as we go forward?
Since the 30 Years' War in Europe in the 17th century, in which Catholics and Protestants were fighting over whose definition of Jesus' love was preferred, and a third of Central Europe was slaughtered. To resolve that conflict in a place called Westphalia in 1648, the modern state was created. The modern state didn't exist before a bunch of wonks got together and said, let's create a new political institution, a new way of organizing how we live. And so they created Protestant states and Catholic states and literally stop the war and put in motion, certainly in the Protestant states, the idea that the legitimacy of the state comes from the people. The United States comes right out of that flow. But since that time, the focus of how collective security is pursued has been largely centered around the security of the state. And today, the enormous convergence of science, technology, commerce, and political power around the military pursuit of security for the state has largely occluded the focus on the security of people. So we need to have a change of the paradigm of how security is pursued from militarism and nationalism to human security. And human security is grounded in how people actually live. And when you look at all of the endeavors of the modern world, they are extraordinarily cooperative. Finance transcends national and religious differences. Commerce is global with seamlessly. And in fact, if you look at governance in terms of resolving differences amongst people peacefully, third-party adjudication of disputes, The business community, through arbitration proceedings rather than using state courts, has figured out how to ensure seamless application of justice in contracts and commerce, such that one can trade, write letters of credit, etc., create franchises worldwide. So we know how to cooperate. We know how to do that. But our focus of how we define security has largely been dominated by a military approach. And that simply has to, it's out of sync with the reality of today's world. The other aspect is, how do we provide goods and services for ourselves? That must be based on the reality of the scientific exploration of a relationship to the natural world. But because human beings are value creatures, we need meaning in our lives. We give meaning. We are blessed with meaning. We can't just view our relationship to the natural world as goods and services. We have to recognize the value intrinsically of the natural world, the value of other species, the value of life itself. And so I would say that in terms of human security, there are pillars. One is the values in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the dignity of every individual, as Dr. Karam pointed out. That value opens the door to so much, because you can't do that unless you see the value in yourself. And the other is the use of science rather than only commerce in our relationship to the natural world. And most importantly, focusing the state's first duty is to provide security for its citizens, and that is human security, not militarism. Those are the principles that I think have to guide us. Military power has not proven very powerful in Afghanistan, in Vietnam. It will not solve Kashmir problem or Palestine-Israel or Azerbaijan and Armenia. No, these are human problems, and they are only solved by our common humanity.
Thank you so much. And I have a question for Dr. Karam. Why does having a multi-faith perspective and understanding matter so much? And what difference does it make in the search for inner and outer peace and well-being?
So a great question. For the same reasons that I shared earlier and that I think were much better articulated by Sadhviji and Dr. Jonathan. First of all, on a practical basis, religious institutions and organizations provide basic social services around the world. So when they work together, that's more services for more people, going further and scaling up impact. It's just that simple formula. When religious leaders come together, when religious institutions come to serve together, there is no room for fundamentalism amongst any of them. The very act of coming together to work together means it's an act of compromise, compromising on certain things that are really about excluding the other and being better than someone else and being the chosen ones rather than the others who are not chosen. Once the religious actors come together, per definition, the common ground is created between them. And that common ground in 99.9% of the cases, if not 1,000% of cases, is a ground of mercy, is what they can all agree to, which is that fundamental message of mercy that all faiths have. So they can certainly do it on their own, and they do, but when they come together, that space for mercy simply is bigger, is exponential. It therefore leaves no one out. And I think that's the very simple, I think it was Albert Einstein who said the genius isn't really in recognizing the obvious. It's not going through convoluted hoops and loops to try to see. It's the very obvious. And the obvious here is that when all those who believe come together to serve, mercy reigns. There's the room for dogma is significantly diminished. You can talk dogma all you want, but you can't serve with dogma. When you serve together across the different divides, you per definition have to serve mercifully with less recognition to distinction and more mercy for the sameness that characterizes us. What COVID has taught us, because we weren't obviously seeing it in spite of so many different signs, what COVID has taught us is that we're all mortal, and this planet is infinite. It's something that we must preserve. Sorry, the planet is finite. We must preserve it. If COVID has taught us one thing, it is that we are interdependent beings. So nobody's safe until everybody is safe. And when all religions come together, the time and the space and the luxury, quite frankly, to be so arrogant towards one another's faith traditions and one's own belief systems is not there. It simply cannot be. I cannot love you and be determined to serve alongside you if I think that you are less than me. It just doesn't work. Then I'll just go do my own thing, thinking I can do better on my own. The whole point is that the minute I recognize that I need to serve alongside you, I am also letting go of that incredible sense of dominance and arrogance that I may possess, thinking I can do it alone. That is what religions must be compelled to do, because every religious tradition and institution has ingrained within it the capacity to go it alone, to try to prove that this particular faith is the best, the only. And that tendency is deeply harmful for all of humanity. How do you counter that tendency? When you step down from that ladder of remarkable arrogance to realize that to love is to serve is to understand that nobody's better than anybody else, because we all are mortals in the eyes of the divine. That the divine is within us as we serve that divine. It's a simple matter like that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that very, very powerful answer. And it would be a blessing if everyone could recognize the foundational truth of that. So, Jonathan, you had mentioned previously in your presentation this aspect of death. And a big cause of anxiety that lurks in the background is this fear of death and the mortality which Dr. Karam was talking about. And what have you learned about addressing the fear of death, and what do you know about this fear of death?
I've had several instances in which God has blessed me with the humbling effect of illness and come close to dying several times. I, like everyone else, has had that intimate conversation with the mystery that brings us all here, and said, why am I here? How do I know you? How do I know where I come from? How do I know what will be my fate when this frail hunk of flesh is put back in the earth? What I've learned is that there is a level of understanding that is our birthright, to understand the luminosity of our own soul. But it doesn't take place with the cognition of the mind. It takes place through the organ of the heart. And there is a power, a mystery that brings us here that is described as love, forgiveness, mercy, compassion, all of these extraordinary qualities that are interconnected in a most beautiful way. And the characteristic of all of these qualities is that they free one from the entrapment of egocentricity. They free you from the entrapment of tomorrow and yesterday and bring you into the presence of the power of life itself. And it said, God is compassion, God is love, and God is forgiveness. But you will never know what that is unless you have the organ to perceive it. And the organ to perceive it is the heart. So you'll never know God's forgiveness if you don't have forgiveness. You'll never know God's mercy if you don't have mercy. You'll never know God's love unless you have a heart that can experience love. And that's what we're here to learn from, with and through each other. And it's discovered within that is the ability to understand this secret. There's something in your eyes that sees, but you can't see it. There's something in your hand that touches, but you can't touch it. There's something in all of us that knows, but that thing that knows, you can't know it as an object. But those who have penetrated that mystery all say it is one. That we are, as it were, interconnected on an inner level, that there is a unified field of consciousness and life and being itself, calling it God or the light of God. It's a mystery beyond description, but we know this, that the people who've experienced that all come back from that experience with what Aza said, wanting to serve and care for one another in a loving way. As Sadhvi said, wanting to care and love one another in a beautiful way. As Audrey has brought us together to affirm our capacity to love and care for one another in a beautiful way, and to demand of the institutions that we create that they reflect that value of the dignity of every human being and the sacredness of the gift of life and the interconnectedness of the natural world and the human world, and the fact that the purpose of our life is to develop that understanding of that mysterious, wonderful, dignified treasure inherent in every birth. That taste of that experience, which can take place in prayer and meditation, or when you really face your mortality and say, I'm gonna find out why I'm here the way a drowning man gets a breath of air, the way a person gets some water in the desert. I want to find the truth of my own soul. If you go with that intensity and that prayer and that intensity and ask that mysterious power for the love and wisdom to know it, the door will be open. You will be given that gift. And if you get one taste of it, you will be good. You will be good. You will be good. And I pray that more of us, and myself as well, stay within that blessing that comes from the sobriety of realizing we're not here for very long, and every one of us is precious.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. So, Sadhviji, as this week of Unity coincides with International Day of Yoga Day, and as I know you host this very famous International Yoga Festival every year, please tell us, what role does yoga have in inner as well as outer peace?
Yoga means union. That is actually what the Sanskrit word yog means. Union. To unite. So yoga is that through which we experience the truth of ourselves, the union of that which never was separate, the re-remembering of the undivided capital S self. So more, rather than a union, you could say it's a reunion. Through practices of using the body, using the breath, practices of meditation, practices of purification. Through the practice of yoga, we experience that reunion with the Creator and the creation, that truth of who we are. But it also very deeply and very directly relates with what we've been speaking about in terms of external peace, because just quickly, the sage Patanjali gave us what we refer to as Ashtanga Yoga. But literally what that means is the 8 limbs of yoga. Now, asana, our physical practices, is limb number 3. Pranayama is limb number 4. But limb number 1 and 2, the foundation of yoga, are literally what you could consider the 10 commandments of a righteous life. No religion, no dogma there. We don't have time now to go into all of them, but I'll share just the first 4 of 10. Non-violence, ahimsa. Satya, truthfulness. Asteya, non-stealing. Apigraha, non-hoarding. Now, for everyone practicing yoga, that's the foundation of our of our practice. You can't begin building something on the 3rd floor. You begin with the foundation, floors 1 and 2. So yoga is predicated upon, rooted upon nonviolence, truthfulness, non-stealing. Now that doesn't just mean we don't go out with guns and grenades and missiles and bombs. It means nonviolence in word, in thought. Nonviolence in what we eat, nonviolence in what we buy, nonviolence in how we conduct business. It means truthfulness in how we understand ourselves and our interconnection with the world. To move through the world in the illusion of separation is untruth. It is not yoga. When we speak about stealing and hoarding, well, it doesn't just mean thou shalt not mug someone on the street or break into someone's house in the night. It means thou shalt not steal the grain, the water of those who are our sisters and brothers across the world. That we shall not channel the food of this world, the wheat, the rice, the soy, the corn that could be feeding people, into feeding the cows and the pigs and the chickens who become our hamburgers and our hot dogs. It means that we may not steal the water that is needed by the people of this planet in order to run industries, whether it's animal agriculture, whether it's fashion industries, whether it's so many other industries that are rooted upon this idea that those who have the luxury to choose should also have the right to make choices that deny others what are inviolable rights to food, to water, to safe working conditions. It means that we shall not steal the freedom, the health of our sisters, our daughters, our children of the world working in sweatshops and bonded labor, simply because we want more, cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. So it means consciousness in every minute and every moment, in what we buy, what we wear, ensuring it's organic, ensuring it's fair trade, ensuring it is not created in ways that are harming our sisters and brothers of any color, any race, any religion, any species across this planet. That it is not stealing from people today or from our future generations. And so as we celebrate International Yoga Day, it's a celebration of the remembrance of our union, of our oneness, and a reminding of our responsibility, whether we call it a spiritual responsibility, a yogic responsibility, a dharmic responsibility, or just a human responsibility, to actually act, think, shop, eat, choose, and move through the world consciously with the awareness that we are not separate from each other, from the rivers, from the trees, from the mountains, or from the people of future generations. We are not separate from that power that has created. And it is our responsibility to live this precious gift we've been given in consciousness, in awareness, in love.
Thank you so much for your very beautiful, beautiful answer. So, Sadhviji, would you please care to give us your closing remarks and what you would like to have our audience be left with of what you have to share?
So much has been shared today already. It's been such a gift, as I said, and as we all keep saying. I think in closing, I would say, if you are committed to inner and outer peace, even if you're committed to just one of them, hopefully today you've realized they are inextricably linked from each other. So regardless of where you enter that river of peace, that river of love, the river is endless and flows through all of us. And so if, as we are committed to this, let us commit ourselves to those three components I spoke about earlier, which are connection and courage and creativity. And they go together. First, we commit to connection. Connection meaning to the divine, whatever that may mean to you, to the truth of who we are, that oneness with the divine creator, that oneness with the divine creation, that oneness with all. And as we connect to that, we become vehicles and vessels, instruments, tools of the flow of the divine, that same intelligence that turns caterpillars into butterflies, that same intelligence that puts apples on apple trees, the same intelligence that causes flowers to open their petals to the sun, or trees to learn to grow sideways if they need to get the light. When we are connected, we have the intelligence to know how to be that tool, how to be that instrument, how to serve in a way that isn't serving our egos, but that is actually a vessel, a vehicle of that divine flow of intelligence, of love, of creation for the world. And we open our hearts courageously because it's not always easy. It isn't always in alignment with the status quo. A lot of times it's a whole new way of being. But from that connection, we have courage, open-hearted courage to walk ways of truth, to embody truth. And out of that stems creativity, ways of then bringing that connection into action, how we can think differently, act differently, vote differently, implement differently, have different policies, so that that peace, that expanded definition of peace, can be brought through us, through the collective us, to all of our sisters and brothers across the world. With such deep gratitude and such deep love to Audrey, to Aza, to Jonathan, such a beautiful family of love, of truth, of oneness. Deep love to Ben, to Adil, to all of those bringing this World Unity Week together for all.
Thank you so much, Sadhviji, for your beautiful closing thoughts. And now we'd like to hear from Dr. Aza Karam. Please share with us your concluding thoughts.
There's really very little that I can possibly add to all the wisdom that has been shared. So I'm not adding anything. I am simply giving thanks to the willingness to speak such profound truths with one another that you, Divine Mother, always enable and always make room for and catalyze. So my last thoughts would be to give tremendous gratitude to you for this opportunity to learn and to listen to one another. tremendous gratitude to Dr. Jonathan Granoff and to Sadhviji Bhagavati Saraswati, because I think each has manifested the beautiful mercy that we're trying to talk about. We all come from such different religions, traditions, cultures, countries, that to see this beautiful synergy in spirit and conversation between spirits can only be thanks to the divine itself, himself, herself. So I want to give thanks. First and foremost, those would be my final thoughts, are just deep, deep, deep gratitude for the very beautiful listening and sharing that took place here, and to each and every one of you for enabling this, making this possible, and again and always to the Divine Spirit and its mercy upon us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karam. Now let's hear from Jonathan Granoff and your closing thoughts.
First, the flow of wisdom that we've just experienced, my closing thought is that this flow should continue in all of us, because what's so wonderful about wisdom is that it's always fresh, always refreshing, and it always causes us to remember the best. And there's been a lot of remembering and pointing toward the best. And wisdom is that consciousness that can understand consciousness, can discern what is good, and can discern how to bring it into action. Knowledge, the great Sufi master, Sufi saint, Baba Muhaiyaddin used to say, knowledge without wisdom is like rain falling into the ocean. No matter how much knowledge without wisdom, it won't satisfy your thirst. And wisdom comes from the heart of compassion. That point of compassion is the foundation of equity in law. That all are equal under the law. That all have to be treated with justice. That all lives are precious. Now, to some extent, this is sort of like our mother saying, wash your hands before dinner. We all know this. But we do have to remind each other, because as you remind others of these truths, you hold yourself to account to live by them. And that's a big deal. It's easy to say these things, but to live by them takes focus, balance, effort, and commitment. So my closing thoughts are asking everyone to help me with that balance, that commitment, and that love, and imploring others to bring the best of themselves into action, to go from the head to the heart to the hand. Now, one of the things that I think could be done, and I'd like to end with something people can do, is ask of every leader, every political leader, especially in democracies, 3 questions. 1, what are you doing to protect the climate? Because the health of the oceans, the health of the forests depends on the climate. It opens the door for many things. Not whether you should, but what are you doing to do that? 2, what are you doing to eliminate poverty and the crushing suffering of people in which no matter how hard they work, their conditions don't change? We now have the social organization and the scientific and technical capacity to eliminate this kind of suffering. And if you go to the least amongst us and take care of them, many things of virtue and goodness come. And 3, what are you doing to get rid of nuclear weapons? This is the codification, institutionalization of the apex of evil, putting the entire future of humanity at risk for a human creation. And last but not least, to ask yourself, have I found the highest, most pure, beautiful love within myself? Have I found that? Have I found the power that gives me life? Have I found the reason why I've been blessed with the gift of journeying through life. Have I found this love? And if you know a little bit about it, am I bringing it into action? And I want to end with this simple prayer. May that great power that gives us life, that gives us breath, that gives us the gift of being in space and time together, give us hearts of courage, melt our hearts of all of the dross that causes differences, and give us the courage to feel the suffering of others and the joy of others as our own, and give us the courage to love as we are loved by the evidence of this breath, of this heartbeat, of this vision, of this taste, of this smell, of this touch, of this sunrise, of this blade of grass, of this wondrous creation that we're put into. Give us hearts of gratitude and the humility to serve. Every wave discovers itself when it bows down and discovers, aha, I am the ocean and I am one with all the other waves. May this knowledge of oneness gained in humility toward the gift of the Creator be bestowed on all who are listening. And may that blessing spread in our lives. Amen.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your beautiful words of wisdom. And I'd like to express my deepest appreciation to our distinguished panelists for taking the time today to share your thoughts on this very important topic. And anyone who knows Jonathan Granoff, Azakaram, Sadhviji Bhagavati Saraswati, know that to bring them together to dialogue on a very important topic is an exceedingly special occasion. And this conversation brought forth each of their unique perspectives born of dedicated, selfless service to humanity, for which I deeply thank each of them. And peace on earth can indeed be a reality, and to attain that reality, we must first find our own inner peace. And in order to take that journey inwards to find inner peace, the three realms of the body, mind, and spirit must be in alignment. And these three realms are operative as long as we are in the physical body that is situated in the context of this lifetime, in the three-dimensional plane of the perception of time and space. And as we have also heard, the body is impermanent and it does not last. And still, it is the vehicle through which we undertake this journey and experience life, so we must take proper care of it. And the mind has a power to create, and therefore we must be very mindful of that upon which we are contemplating, for that upon which we contemplate, we become and we project into the world. And for this spirit that is the vital force that gives life to all things, this life force is sacred, and we are each imbued with it. This supreme source, this sacred life force, is love. And cultivating one's spiritual life on whatever spiritual path or religious tradition one chooses is essential to develop self-awareness and the deep core of peace and love within our hearts. Much of our inner work is to help us to become better people through insight and awareness, and how we must change and correct our own inner film and our ways of thinking, so that what we are projecting on the screen of life is coherent with our deepest values and consistent with the love, compassion, kindness, and beauty of the reality of our true selves as spiritual beings. And we cannot abdicate our responsibility as global citizens to do our part to make this world a peaceful place. May we dedicate ourselves to helping to make this world a better place, whether we devote our time as activists to abolish nuclear weapons, or head a major interfaith organization, or undertake massive sanitation and clean water projects, while also giving spiritual food. May we all move with the power of that love in our hearts in selfless service to humanity. And each one of our panelists today have demonstrated through their life's work this example and model of selfless service. And may God bless them infinitely and always with his protection, his divine light, and his love. And I conclude with my thanks again to our speakers. And I leave with a few words of wisdom from Rumi, who said, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there." Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening, and may you all be blessed in God's love.